My stepdad finally got what he deserved on Father's Day. When my mom married Blake, I was 12. Dad had been gone for 14 months. Boating accident on Lake Superior that turned a family vacation into a nightmare. One minute he was checking the anchor line. The next, he was underwater and not coming back up. They found his body 3 days later, tangled in debris near the shore. Mom waited exactly 13 months before bringing Blake home. He taught at the community college where she worked in admissions, economics, and business law, tall with wire-rimmed glasses and a collection of vintage watches he wore to faculty events. He makes me feel like myself again. Mom explained over dinner the night she introduced us. I need you to be supportive, Jaden. So I was supportive. I helped Blake set up his home office in what used to be Dad's woodworking studio. I didn't complain when he replaced Dad's fishing trophies with his academic awards and framed publications. I even pretended not to notice when he converted Dad's boat restoration project in the garage into storage space for his cycling equipment, because maintaining vintage watercraft is impractical for our lifestyle. For 3 years, I played the role of accepting stepson. I attended his faculty dinners wearing the sport coats he bought me. I tolerated his colleagues who praised how well-adjusted I was for 15. I buried my anger beneath straight A's and polite silence. Mom didn't see when I stopped talking about Dad. Too focused on Blake's tenure review and their plans to buy vacation property. Too occupied with his department politics and the consulting work he was building on the side. Meanwhile, I kept Dad's tackle box hidden in my closet and his compass on my nightstand, the only things I'd managed to save before Blake's reorganization. Blake tried in his calculated way. He paid for my summer camps and set up a college fund that he mentioned frequently at family gatherings. He hosted elaborate graduation parties for me and introduced me as my stepson Jaden to important people who asked about his family. He even started a trust account in my name, making sure Mom's relatives knew about his financial planning. But when I made varsity baseball freshman year, something Dad and I had worked towards since Little League, it was my coach who sat in the stands because Blake had a consulting presentation. When I had panic attacks about the accident, reliving the moment Dad went under, it was my guidance counselor who talked me through breathing exercises. The breaking point came during junior year. I'd been selected for a statewide academic competition in Dad's hometown, 4 hours north. The event fell on the same weekend as Blake's big consulting contract signing, a deal he'd been negotiating for months. Obviously, you'll need to skip the competition, he said while reviewing contracts at dinner. This signing opens major doors for our financial future. Opportunities like this fund college educations. Mom hesitated, then nodded when Blake squeezed her hand. There'll be other competitions, she said quietly. This is important for all of us. I went to my room and opened the box Dad had left me. Inside were his college notebooks, some family photos, and a letter I'd been too scared to read, afraid of what final words might say. That night, I read it 3 times. Most of it covered what you'd expect. Pride in who I was becoming, memories he treasured, advice about integrity, and choosing the hard right over the easy wrong. But the last section, dated a week before the accident, was different. If you're reading this, son, you need to know about the storage unit. The key is taped inside the back cover. What you find there will answer questions you don't even know to ask yet. I'm sorry I didn't handle this differently. The key was small and brass with a number stamped on it. The next day, I skipped school and took a bus to the storage facility on the industrial side of town. The manager, an older guy with Navy tattoos, recognized Dad's name immediately. Your father was a good man, he said, leading me to Unit 247. Came here every month like clockwork. Inside the unit were file boxes, a laptop, and an envelope with my name written in Dad's careful handwriting. My dear Jaden, it began. By now, Blake has probably established himself completely in our lives. I've known about him and your mother for 8 months. Since I hired an investigator after noticing inconsistencies in her finances, I found out about their relationship when I was trying to understand where money was going. The investigator's report was thorough, covering nearly a year. There were photos of Mom and Blake at hotels during supposed faculty development weekends, emails discussing their future together, timestamps showing text messages exchanged while I was at my baseball games. She's taking Jaden to his grandmother's Saturday. Come to the house. We can have the whole afternoon. Sometimes I imagine what life will be like when we don't have to hide. That last message was from Blake, sent 6 weeks before Dad died. I opened credit card statements showing charges at restaurants I'd never heard of on nights when Mom claimed to be at committee meetings, hotel receipts from the conference where she said she was rooming with her colleague Janet, parking garage timestamps proving they were together when she told Dad she was working late on admissions reviews. But there was more. The file showed financial records proving Blake and Mom had been systematically draining Dad's business accounts. Money from the marine restoration company he'd built over 15 years. They'd been moving funds through Blake's consulting firm. hiding transactions as business expenses and investment transfers. Dad's company had been profitable, providing steady income for our family and employing 8 people in our community. The records showed Blake had been advising Mom on how to access Dad's business accounts, coaching her through wire transfers and check authorizations. I found spreadsheets tracking hundreds of thousands moved over 18 months. Money that flowed from Dad's company through shell accounts Blake had established, then disappeared into investments registered under Mom's maiden name. Dad's signatures appeared on authorization forms. But the handwriting analysis report in the file suggested they were forged copies of checks made out to vendors that didn't exist, invoices for services never performed. The worst part, notes from Dad's doctor appointments and lab results he kept. I started feeling strange after our anniversary dinner last year. Dad had written, dizzy spells, nausea that wouldn't quit, fatigue that made simple tasks exhausting. The doctors tested for everything standard, but found nothing definitive when I started tracking my symptoms. I noticed they intensified after meals your mother prepared specifically for me, special dinners she made when you were at sleepovers, or practice. There were medical records showing elevated levels of substances that shouldn't have been present, results from private lab tests on samples from our kitchen, notes from consultations with toxicologists who'd reviewed his case, all suggesting chronic exposure to compounds that could cause the disorientation and physical weakness that had plagued Dad in his final months. I can't prove what happened on the boat, Dad wrote. Whether my dizziness that day was natural or induced, by the time you read this, it won't matter for me. But I couldn't leave you unprotected. The company is legally yours through the trust your grandfather established. Blake and your mother don't know this. The transition happens automatically when you turn 18. But I've also created a second protection layer with attorneys they don't know exist. The final pages detailed his contingency plan, a trust that couldn't be touched, business shares that would revert to me, property titles that were actually in my name through grandfather's estate planning. Dad had spent his last months working with lawyers Blake, and Mom knew nothing about, protecting everything he'd built. I sat in that storage unit for hours. When I finally left, something fundamental had shifted. The confusion and grief that had defined me for 3 years had crystallized into cold clarity. I didn't confront them immediately. I didn't run to the police. I did something more calculated. I became the perfect stepson. For the next 18 months, I was flawless. I excelled in every area Blake valued. I joined the investment club he suggested, attended the business seminars he recommended, asked his advice on financial planning. At night, I meticulously built on Dad documentation. Each time Blake discussed a client or consulting deal at dinner, I researched the companies involved, tracking money through the networks of accounts Dad had started mapping. I created my own database, expanding on his work. My bedroom became my operations center. I installed a hidden safe behind my bookshelf where I kept copies of everything. I recorded conversations at family dinners using a device hidden in my watch, business discussions they had when they assumed I was focused on homework. I photographed documents Blake left in his office, trusting that his 17-year-old stepson wouldn't understand complex financial instruments. 8 months after finding Dad's storage unit, I contacted his attorneys. The envelope had contained business cards for 3 people, a forensic accountant, a lawyer specializing in corporate fraud, and a retired prosecutor who'd been my grandfather's law school roommate. I met them at a diner 2 towns over on a Saturday when I was supposedly at a robotics tournament. They'd been waiting for my call. Your father prepared us for this meeting, the prosecutor said after reviewing the evidence I compiled. He said you'd be ready when the time was right. What do you want to do, Jaden? I'd spent months considering options. I could expose everything immediately, watching Blake and possibly Mom face criminal charges. I could wait until 18 and simply claim what was mine. Forcing a confrontation, I could walk away entirely, starting fresh somewhere they couldn't touch me. Instead, I chose Dad's approach, methodical, strategic justice. I want to learn how to run the business properly. I told them about corporate law, financial management, forensic accounting. I want to be ready to take control of Dad's company and undo everything they've done. The prosecutor nodded slowly. Your father said you'd choose this path. We have a training plan ready. For the next 14 months, I lived 2 completely separate lives at home and school. I was the model stepson Blake could showcase at faculty events. But 4 evenings weekly and most Saturdays, I was in intensive training sessions disguised as volunteer work and study groups. The forensic accountant taught me to read complex financial statements, identify fraudulent transactions, and trace money through sophisticated laundering schemes. The lawyer educated me on business law, contracts, and specific legal mechanisms that would let me seize control of Dad's company. The prosecutor connected me with people who'd known and respected my grandfather, business leaders who were disgusted by what had happened to his son's company. Meanwhile, I worked with Dad's attorneys preparing everything, the evidence, the legal filings, the business transition plan. I graduated high school a semester early at 17, taking accelerated courses and testing out of requirements. Blake and Mom celebrated, their prodigy heading to a prestigious business program with early admission. What they didn't know was that I'd also been taking online courses in corporate management and finance, learning the practical details of running Dad's marine restoration company, studying the industry, the clients, the employees who'd stayed loyal despite the chaos Blake and Mom had created. The summer before college, Blake announced he wanted to officially adopt me. "You're my son in every way that matters," he said during a lunch at his favorite expensive restaurant. "Let's make it legal before you start university. It'll simplify everything. Estate planning, your benefits through my insurance, your position with my consulting firm." I studied his expression, looking for authenticity. There was calculation in the way he glanced at Mom before continuing, an agenda in how he'd stage this conversation in public, where I'd be less likely to refuse. This wasn't about connection. It was about securing his access to whatever assets he thought would come to me, about cementing his legal standing in case questions arose about Dad's company and the missing money. I smiled and agreed, telling them nothing would make me happier. "We should celebrate properly," Mom said, already planning. "Maybe invite the Hendersons," Blake's department chair, and his wife. That night, I called an emergency meeting with my team. "The adoption changes nothing legally," the lawyer confirmed. "Your rights to the company come through your grandfather's trust, which supersedes any subsequent parental arrangements. But it does give us leverage. The process requires complete financial disclosure from both parties." "How close are we?" I asked. The accountant adjusted his reading glasses. "We tracked 91% of the diverted funds, documented the full scope of the fraud. It's more than sufficient for criminal prosecution. And the evidence about Dad." I couldn't bring myself to finish the sentence. The prosecutor leaned forward. "The medical evidence strongly suggests poisoning, but proving it definitively is nearly impossible this long after. The pattern is there, the motive is clear, but we don't have the smoking gun. A defense attorney would create reasonable doubt. We focus on what we can prove." "Absolutely," I decided. "The fraud is ironclad." "That's enough." As I stood to leave, the prosecutor handed me a small package. "Your father left this with instructions to give it to you when you were ready to move forward." Inside was Dad's pocket watch, the one his father had given him when he'd started the business. He wore this the day he signed his first major restoration contract. The prosecutor explained, "Said he wanted you to have it when you were ready to build something of your own." I carried that watch every day after, a reminder of what I was fighting for. 3 weeks later, Father's Day arrived. Blake had planned an elaborate cookout, inviting his department colleagues and consulting clients, a celebration of family and professional success, with catered food and professional photos for the holiday cards they'd already designed. I spent the days before carefully preparing my gift, working late into the night, assembling documents, organizing evidence, creating the perfect presentation. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the most thoughtful gift I'd ever given him. The morning of the cookout was bright and warm. Perfect weather for Blake's carefully orchestrated event. Caterers arrived early, followed by the rental company setting up tables and a sound system in our backyard. The space looked nothing like the garden Dad had maintained, where he'd taught me about native plants and ecosystem balance. I found Blake in his office, reviewing talking points for conversations he planned to have with potential clients. "I have something for you," I said, handing him an elegantly wrapped box. "Oh, I didn't need to do that," he replied with practiced surprise. We both knew I'd never given him a Father's Day gift before. "Open it now," I suggested. "It's personal." Something in my tone made him pause. He studied my face briefly, then carefully removed the wrapping. Inside was a leather-bound album, on the cover embossed in gold, "To the Man Who Changed Everything." Blake's expression shifted slightly as he opened it. The first page showed a photo of Dad, smiling on his boat before the accident. "What is this?" he asked, his voice tight. "Keep going," I said calmly. "It tells a story." Page by page, the album documented everything. Hotel receipts with dates and locations, bank statements showing the diverted funds, emails discussing their plans, each item carefully annotated with context and legal implications. I watched his face transform as he turned each page, confusion becoming alarm, then fear. By the time he reached the section on Dad's medical evidence and the suspicious circumstances of the accident, his hands were shaking. "This is ridiculous," he whispered, but kept turning pages, unable to stop himself. The final section detailed the business structure he didn't know existed, the irrevocable trusts, the automatic transfer control, and the meeting scheduled for tomorrow with federal investigators. "Those consulting fees you've been collecting," I said conversationally, "the ones from companies that don't actually exist." Turns out financial regulators are very interested in that pattern, especially when combined with the corporate fraud charges. Update, 6 hours. Blake closed the album carefully. "You're making a serious mistake. Your mother and I will fight this. You'll destroy her life. I'm giving you both a choice," I replied. "Tomorrow morning at 9, you'll meet with my attorneys. We'll discuss terms for avoiding prosecution. Or I can turn everything over to the FBI right now. Their office is already briefed and waiting for my call." His face drained of color. What do you want? The company returns to legitimate operation under my control. All diverted funds return to the business accounts. You and Mom resign from any involvement with Dad's business. In exchange, I don't pursue criminal charges for the financial fraud. And the other allegations, he asked quietly, referring to the medical evidence, that depends entirely on your cooperation and truthfulness in the financial matters. The album stays between us if you handle this correctly. His eyes darted to the window, where guests were starting to arrive for the cookout. You planned this for today specifically, of course. I learned strategic timing from watching you. The cookout lasted 4 excruciating hours. Blake maintained his composure through fixed smiles and mechanical conversations. I played my role perfectly, the devoted stepson, thanking him for his guidance and support in front of people who would remember this day differently in a few weeks. Mom sensed something was wrong. She kept glancing between us, trying to read the tension, but unable to identify its source. Is everything okay? She asked me quietly while Blake was giving a toast to family. Better than it's been in years, I told her. You should probably talk to Blake later. He has something important to discuss with you. After the guests left, I found him in Blake's office. Mom pale and shaking, Blake slumped in his chair. She turned to me with tears streaming down her face. How could you do this? We gave you everything. You gave me things Dad earned. I corrected her. Things you stole from his company while he was dying. There's a difference, but Jaden, he died in an accident. She started. Did I interrupted? Or did he drown because he was disoriented from months of being poisoned? Asked Blake about the prescriptions he filled using his colleagues' medical credentials. The medications that shouldn't have been in our house. She looked at Blake, who couldn't meet her eyes. You told me those were for your migraines. He said, Jaden, I don't know what lies he's told you, but I held up my phone. I have Dad's medical records, lab results, toxicology reports, and recordings of you two discussing the company takeover dates, times, details. The FBI is very interested. Mom sank into a chair. This will ruin us. Only if you refuse my terms. Blake has the details. You have until 9 tomorrow morning to decide. Prison or cooperation. I left them there and drove to the storage unit, sitting in the space where Dad had kept his evidence. I'm doing what you started. I told the empty room. Hope I'm making you proud. Update, 3 months. The meeting lasted 6 hours. Blake and Mom, accompanied by their lawyer, agreed to every term. The business transition was structured as early succession planning, publicly framed as honoring Dad's legacy by having his son take leadership. Blake resigned from his consulting connections to the company, maintaining his college position, but losing access to the lucrative fraud network he'd built. The money returned gradually through carefully structured transfers that looked like investment returns and asset rebalancing. Their lawyer negotiated language that protected them from public scandal in exchange for complete cooperation and permanent separation from Dad's business. I moved into an apartment near the company headquarters, spending 14-hour days learning operations from the employees who'd stayed loyal through years of Blake's mismanagement. They'd known something was wrong, but couldn't prove it. Relief was evident when I explained the changes. We've been waiting for you, the senior restoration specialist said. Your dad talked about you constantly, said you had his eye for detail and your grandfather's business sense. Mom tried reaching out twice, calls I didn't answer, letters I didn't open. Blake maintained absolute silence, accepting his diminished role with the resignation of someone who knew he'd escaped worse consequences. The hardest part was the uncertainty about Dad's death. The evidence strongly suggested foul play, but the passage of time and limitations of forensic science meant I'd likely never know for certain whether the accident was engineered or simply exploited. The toxicology reports proved he'd been poisoned. The motive and opportunity were documented, but the actual moment on the boat remained ambiguous, a gray area that haunted my quieter moments. 3 months after taking control, I hired a private investigator to conduct one final review, examining every detail of the accident, interviewing everyone who'd been to the lake that weekend, reviewing marina security footage that had been stored but never analyzed. He found something the original investigation had missed. Footage showing Blake at a marina supply shop 2 days before a trip, purchasing marine equipment, including anchor line. The shop owner remembered him specifically because he'd asked detailed questions about weight ratings and failure points. The line that failed on Dad's boat, causing him to go into the water to investigate, had been replaced recently, replaced with line rated for significantly less weight than our boat required. The investigator's report included material analysis suggesting deliberate sabotage, still not definitive proof for prosecution. The investigator concluded, but combined with everything else, the picture is clear. I added his report to the file and locked it away. Some truths don't need courtrooms to be real. The company thrived under restored ethical management. We rebuilt client relationships damaged by Blake's shortcuts, hired back skilled workers he'd let go to cut costs, reinvested in the quality restoration work that had been Dad's passion. Within 6 months, we were profitable again. Within a year, we'd expanded. I enrolled in business school part-time, taking classes that filled gaps in my knowledge while running the company. The balance was exhausting but necessary, proving I could handle what Dad had built and grow it further. Last month, I finalized the purchase of a second facility, expanding our capacity exactly as Dad had planned before his partnership with Blake and Mom derailed everything. Blake and Mom divorced quietly 8 months after everything came out. She discovered he had another relationship going, a colleague from his department. Apparently, he had a pattern of overlapping commitments. The irony of her shock at his infidelity wasn't lost on me. She moved to another state, taking a position at a different university. Her resignation letter cited family reasons and a need for a fresh start. We haven't spoken since. I'm not sure we ever will. Some betrayals sever connections beyond repair. Blake remains at the college, diminished professionally and socially. His consulting business collapsed once word spread about the circumstances of his separation from my company. Academic communities are small, and reputations matter. He lives alone in a modest apartment, a significant downgrade from the lifestyle he'd built on stolen money. Yesterday was Father's Day again. I spent it at Dad's grave for the first time in months, brought him wildflowers like the ones from his garden. I did what you asked. I told him the business is secure. Your legacy is protected. The people who betrayed you face consequences. I wish you could see it. As I turned to leave, I noticed someone watching from across the cemetery. Blake, holding flowers of his own. Our eyes met. He didn't approach, just nodded once with an expression I couldn't read. Then he walked to a different section entirely, visiting someone else's grave. I learned later from Mom's sister that he'd been visiting his own father's grave, a man who'd apparently died disappointed in his son's choices. Some patterns repeat across generations. Every Father's Day since, I visit Dad's grave and send Mom a single photo of the business, thriving and ethical, with a note that reads, "Thinking of Dad today." She never responds, but her sister tells me she keeps every photo in a folder. Looking at them when she thinks no one's watching, some guilt never fades. Some gifts keep teaching long after they're given.